Hey everybody, this is Perch, and some big news. I have this weird feeling of deja vu here a little bit, and I'll explain why. But Scott Snyder, of course, writer, Batman, Noctera, Witches, many titles. I still buy Black Mirror as the strongest Batman work he's done, but I know that makes you that old school kind of snob if you say things like that. Anyway, Scott Snyder is being announced as a new deal with Amazon's Comixology. So the way this is being reported, if you're reading the Hollywood Reporter version, it's written a little bit. I don't want to say there's just some fuzziness to the words that make it a little bit tricky. You actually have to read it a few times to really get what's going on. So if you're wanting to explore this a little bit yourself, certainly I'd check out Comixology Unlimited and look a little bit more into some of the details because there's just some general fuzziness about the way this is written, and some adjective like Ink's sweeping deal. It's a good deal. But it is in alignment with Amazon's Comixology to some extent. I'll explain that why. I'll explain as we go, because otherwise it's confusing. Well, I said I had deja vu. So if I can take you back in time a little bit to about, 3 years ago, Amazon announced these Comixology originals. And they put a couple creators on there, but they were not top tier creators. And when I say that, I don't mean any offense to the people who were part of that original announcement, but they weren't the biggest names in the industry at that moment. They were known people, but it was a quieter deal. And there was a little bit of kind of head scratching at the time because Amazon had made a lot of noise about Comixology and putting real money into it. And, they basically hyped up this event as going to be really significant for the company. And then when they announced it, the creators and the titles, and some of them were very good, but the actual names involved were not that superstar level. And so it kind of felt like Amazon was somewhat tone deaf to comics because they said, look, we're doing this amazing thing. And it's like, oh. And this is, by the way, not unique to comics. I think Apple had a similar kind of thing happen with their Apple Plus, their TV service, where they're like, we're going to bring you the very best. And then the stuff came out. It's like, there's some good stuff in here, but not a lot of it. And that was also kind of the problem with Comixology and the originals because they quickly got, when Marvel's putting out 90 books a month and DC over 60 and climbing, then, it's if you do like, hey, we're going to put out 6 comics and we'll see you again next year. They quickly lose the news cycle. And by the way, just as a precursor to all this, because there's a bunch of different ways to look at this, I also think Amazon Comixology will lose the news cycle. I think part of going with Scott Snyder is certainly an attempt to up their game in terms of the level of creators. Snyder, obviously a much the highest profile creator they've worked with in this sense, and also this idea that Snyder is going to bring some of his frequent collaborators, other names like Greg Capullo, who worked with him, of course, on Death Metal. So I think there's a change of strategy here kind of afoot. But a lot of the core to what Comixology is how it's been. So to briefly explain, you can subscribe to Comixology Unlimited, and they boast, around 25,000. They actually need to update their page because I think it's a lot higher than that. But you get these Comixology originals, which you can only read through Comixology. It's digital, costs you $6 a month. And if you like it, then the idea is that some of these comics will get printed at some point. That kind of transition from digital to you could get it in a printed version has been clunky from the Amazon perspective. They haven't explained it well. They haven't leveraged a lot of their own resources, and they tend to promote. It's like whoever's doing their graphic novel section on the core Amazon storefront is disconnected from Comixology, and they're not talking. It's been a clunky kind of environment. So that is one change that's in this announcement, in that they will be released digitally at that $5.99 price point, and then the idea is that it will appear in print at kind of an unknown time via Dark Horse Books. And Dark Horse Books doesn't have the best, I would say, profile within Amazon. So maybe this is something that changes in the future. But anyway, the idea is that they're at least saying they're making it more clear there's a print path here. But what they're not making completely clear is how that print path is coming. Is it happening day and day at the same time as a digital release? Does it come 6 months later? Where's the primary hype of this going to be? Is it going to be through Diamond or through Penguin Random House, or is it going to be on Amazon only? Or there are some other questions around the print side of this that remain to be seen. But what does this mean? So to answer a couple questions, is Scott Snyder exclusive now to Amazon? The answer is no, nearly as far as we can tell. Does this radically change the way that comics are getting done? No, and I say that because the idea of the Comixology Originals program is not new. It didn't start with Scott Snyder today. It actually, like I said, it's been in place for quite a while with largely the same structure. Now, I have no inside knowledge of this, but of course, Scott Snyder is going to be paid significantly more for his name and his involvement than some of the other creators, and I'm sure there are special parts to that agreement. I mean, of course there are. And the article sort of alludes to that, but I mean, no one knows that, nor should they. Snyder's not just going to post his contract up for everybody to see. But the thing that people are saying, and this is where there's an interesting line. And you have to read this a couple times because Hollywood Reporter, I think this is where it's very clunky in how they're reporting it. Amazon retains no rights to the comics under Snyder's deal, meaning he and his artists will be in control when it comes to film, TV, and merchandise. Okay, now this is different to some extent for what's happened before in the Comixology Originals, but there have been some special deals for this. Isn't the first time with Snyder, at least from this sentence. I'm sure again there are some things that Snyder got that others didn't, but basically this is saying that the comic is published here, but anything that goes beyond the comics, film, TV, merchandise, presumably games, other things, that Snyder gets to negotiate those deals on his own. But the second sentence is an interesting one, and this is where a lot of lawyers crafted some interesting language, I'm sure. Amazon does get a brief first look, but Snyder has no obligation to grant rights to the company. This is extremely interesting wording. So first of all, there's no such thing as a brief first look. That's not a legal term. There's first look or there's no first look. Now, what's first look? It means that if you're working with someone, in this case, if Scott Snyder's working with Amazon and Comixology to put these comics out, it means if there is a desire to take it to movie or TV or film, that Amazon has first call or for the first, the ability to look at this initially. Before the rights go to others. Now, first looks often have different kinds of terms attached to them, usually things like first right of refusal, which is different from first look. First right of refusal means that Amazon would have to, in this deal, Amazon would have to actively say, no, we don't want it, in order to free up Snyder to go sell it to somebody else. And now that does not look like the case here, particularly with the line no obligations to grant rights to the company. But first looks do have terms attached to them. They're not just this brief first look is a laughable 3 words. A brief, like Amazon has a 24-hour window to quickly look at that's a silly thing. Like Snyder can give them a 15-minute Zoom call. That's it. It's a weird term. And whenever there's kind of legal terms thrown around and there's weird words thrown into it, you kind of always scratch your head a little bit. But basically, it is going to be in Amazon's best interest to do more with this. And it's going to be in Scott's best interest to do more with this with Amazon because they're paying the bills. He's starting with these first couple titles. And if he immediately starts shuttling them off to other places, then Amazon's going to start working with other people. So, it's going to be in everybody's best interest to try and make the whole thing work. And that's how it's going to be pitched. But it is putting some rights in the hands of the creator, which in fairness, there are other places that offer these same rights. I think the difference is this is a big time company at the same, or bigger. Amazon's footprint in terms of their financial profile is bigger than some of the big two. You have Disney, you have AT&T, Discovery, DC. Amazon's a bigger player in many cases than both of those, especially with the media working. Not as much as Disney, but on their own right. So the last piece of this is, who is he working with? So quite a few people: Raphael Albuquerque, Francesco Francavilla, Jamal Engel, Jock, Tulate, Francis Manipul, Dan Ponassian, and of course Greg Capullo. We've got a handful of books, so let's look at the 8 books that have been announced. Now they're going to start in October. They're not all coming out in October, but they're going to begin in October and kind of roll out. And some of these are limited series, some are graphic novels, one-time graphic novels. It's interesting because at one point in the article it says some of these are ongoing books, but there's no indication these are ongoing books. These are ongoing books in the way that indie titles are sometimes ongoing books, if that makes any sense, meaning they're, we'll see. But anyway, so first off, let's look through the titles. We've got Barnstormers by Scott, and art is by Tula Lafte. The idea is that it's a high-flying adventure romance set after the First World War. So looks like a woman pilot, and there's going to be adventure and romance, Barnstormers, retro kind of feel. Book of Evil. This is by Scott Snyder and Jock, and this is a story, it is a prose story about 4 young friends growing up in a strange near future where over 90% of the population are born as psychopaths. This one feels like definitely like an OGN as opposed to a series. But then we got Scott Snyder and Dan Ponassian. It is Canary, a canary. It's canary is what it is, not cannery. It'd be funny if it was cannery though. Anyway, it's 1891. A mine collapses in and of itself. Find out what the dark substance found 666 feet underground in this horror western. Then we got Clear. Clear is by Scott Snyder and Francis Manipul, and this is a sci-fi mystery thrill ride into a strange dystopian future where a neurological internet connection is transforming reality. We have Duck and Cover, Scott Snyder, Raphael Albuquerque. This is a manga-influenced, we're going to hear that term a lot in the next year, a manga-influenced teen adventure set in a strange post-apocalyptic America of 1955. We've got Dudley Dotson and the Forever Machine by Scott Snyder and Jamal Engel. This is a rollicking adventure story about a boy, his dog, and a machine that controls time and space. What could go wrong? We've got Night of the Ghoul, Scott Snyder and Francesco Francavilla. Dazzling work of horror intercutting between the present-day narrative and the story of a lost horror film. And then finally, we have Demons, and this is Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo. This is and Jonathan Glapion. This is a conflict between good and evil is about to come to a head when a teenage hero embarks on a journey that unveils a secret society, monsters, and mayhem. So those are the series. Most have a horror bent to it. There's definitely an attempt here to break open some other genres. It's clear in the descriptions, but mainly we have horror. We have a little bit of the dystopian future type adventure stuff. It feels a lot like, the Amazing Stories anthology series. It has that same feel to it with a little bit of a horror bent. So anyway, congratulations, Scott Snyder. It's interesting to see new attempts being made. The key here, though, will be in October when these books come out, because this is where Amazon has failed a couple times with Comixology, is they announce these things, they have a press release, they do a little video, they get the various things out, and then 3 months later when the titles actually start shipping, suddenly nobody cares. There's very little marketing. It tends to go very, very quiet, and then by 30 to 45 days after the titles have actually been released, it's dead. And I know several creators who certainly have done things with Amazon and Comixology. A couple of those creators probably a bit pissed right now. I got at least one mail from one of the creators that was on Comixology with the initial launch of books. Not terribly, I would say, positive about this announcement. Some hard feelings, I'm sure, because it is that problem. Will Comixology, Amazon keep promoting this after the initial hype, or will they move on to the next writer? So that's the question mark. But probably some good stories in here. What are you most interested in based on what's being promoted? And let me know in the comments below. And thanks for listening.